Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. And first of all, let me say congratulations to, again, a team that has been waiting a long time to get one of those Super Bowl rings. And so, again, the Philadelphia Eagles. And also, if you have not paid attention, just the number of Christians on the team. The coach just yesterday, praise to my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Zach Ernst, of course, is the receiver, talked about glory to God. Nick Foltz also said that, as well as given a testimony. He's gone to Liberty University and wants to be a pastor when he graduates. And even in the commentaries, Tony Dungy said the Lord had Nick Foltz here for this time. So that and many others is a great story, by the way, about how they are so dedicated to one another and give accountability to one another. So if nothing else, excited for not only the Philadelphia Eagles, but especially for some of the Christians on the team, and what a great opportunity to give testimony to Jesus Christ. We are going to get back into the news in the second hour, but one of the things I like to do from time to time is do not just to educating you about issues in the news, but equipping you, and leadership is one of the topics we have talked about on this program. At least once or twice a year, we do a program on leadership. This one especially is of interest, because I first heard about it through Andy Stanley, because Clay Scroggins, who's going to be with us, is the author of a book, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And as I said before, all of us in one way or another are leaders. Some of you are pastors or elders or deacons or maybe Sunday school teachers, so that is the case. Some of you are in the area of business and you're leading a team. If you're a parent, of course, you're a leader in that regard. And even more importantly, we're going to suggest that sometimes leadership doesn't necessarily require you to have the title. As a matter of fact, by being a leader, you sort of earn the title. So we're going to get into that in some detail. This is a fascinating new book that I've been hearing about, and just thrilled to do the interview with Clay Scroggins, who is the lead pastor at North Point Community Church. Of course, his pastor's in leadership has been something that we can certainly get into in just a few minutes. Of course, he also technically works for Andy Stanley, so he understands a little bit about some of the tension in leading and all of that. He is a graduate of Dallas Theological Seminary, has a master's degree as well as a doctorate in online church, and he lives in Georgia and now joins us by phone. Clay, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Kerby, so glad to be with you. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for your show. And I'm excited about this conversation.
Well, I appreciate the good work that you have done as a DTS graduate and as an individual who at one time began to realize, you know, I can be a leader even before they've given me a title. Now you've got a pretty good title, but let's talk about that, because early on in the book you talk a little bit about sort of your spiritual pilgrimage in this idea of understanding that leadership is something that can happen even before you get the title. And oftentimes, if you're a good leader, that's when the title comes, right?
That's correct. My struggle in writing this book, Kerby, primarily was, I thought, who do I think I am to write a leadership book? Because I, like anybody else, I struggle with, seeing myself as a leader. And it really is more of a story of my own life of, hey, here's where I am in life. I work at a multi-site church. I feel like a lot of the lessons that I've learned in leadership happen quicker because we are multi-site, and I started realizing that I don't have all of the authority that I think I need in order to lead. And so it really caused me to dive into trying to encourage people, and really trying to encourage myself to understand how to leverage what I do have to be able to make a change, to make a difference, to push our organization forward. And in order to do that, I really had to dig into the interesting relationship between authority and leadership.
And that is certainly important. And, I don't know you, Clay, that well other than through the book, but I got the sense that you are sort of a natural-born leader. I've had a chance over the years to meet people like John Maxwell or Norm Sondra, used to be the general manager of the Mavericks. And, I meet some of these people, and they just sort of leadership comes from their DNA. But whether you are a natural-born leader or whether you have to learn those leadership characteristics, that's kind of why we're talking about this today, and that's why you wrote the book, isn't it?
Correct. And I really believe that no matter I think the great thing about what leadership actually is, that leadership is actually influence, that it has far more to do with your ability to influence others, your ability to persuade others, your ability to move others forward. It has far more to do with that and far less to do with authority. And so I have found this topic to be very hopeful and hopefully very helpful to people who don't necessarily see themselves as leaders or feel like they're the leader. And certainly, not having a title just implicitly makes us feel like maybe I'm not a leader because I'm not the most senior in charge, or I don't have the big office, or I don't have the parking spot. And so naturally it's easy to discount ourselves or discredit ourselves. But I have found this message to be very, very hopeful for people at any position. The interesting thing about leadership content, and our world is not short on leadership content. The interesting thing is that the majority of it is written to the senior leader.
Yes.
And so for me, I started thinking, well, hey, Kerby, what about the rest of us? What about the other 99% of us that are not the general manager or are not the CEO or are not the senior vice president? And my hope is that in encouraging others through sharing my own story, that it would allow us all to get to that place where we realize, hey, I can have an influence right from the seat that I'm in. And that's my hope in writing this too for myself, is that I kind of envision this world where God could drop me into any organization at any level. And if I could exercise some of these behaviors and principles, maybe I could have a difference. Maybe I can make a difference from whatever seat that I'm in. That's the hope through all of this.
Well, again, and this is why I'm so excited about the book, because as you heard me say in the outset, and whenever I've talked about leadership, I always try to help people understand that you're probably in a leadership role, but you haven't recognized it. If you're a parent, you're a leader right off the bat.
That's
and
right.
if you're in church leadership of all, you're a leader. If you're in the business world and you have at least one person that reports to you, you're a leader. So, but there are some people who say, well, I'm not a leader. Well, this book is for all of us, including those individuals that just could never have thought that they were in a position of leadership. So I want to come back and get to that issue of identity crisis, which is in your second chapter, because that kind of gets back to the fact that sometimes people say, well, if I don't have the position, then I'm not a leader.
Right,
or,
right.
I don't have those leadership skills, golly, Clay Scroggins, well, he's good at that, but, that's not my thing. And so we want to get into that in just a minute. But let me just say that we need to take a break. And first of all, the book is about 250 pages. It is published by Zondervan. I would imagine you should be able to find it in your local bookstore. But if not, we have a link to Clay's website. We have a link here so that you can get a copy of this in paperback or Kindle. And again, it is How to Lead When You're Not in Charge, Leveraging Influence When You Lack Authority. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about this idea of identity and then reclaiming the kibosh. I learned a little bit about kibosh and kubosh, so we'll get into that. Then we'll talk about some of those behaviors. What are some things that leaders have in common, no matter whether they're leading a Fortune 500 company or leading a member of Congress or even the presidency, or whether they're a leader of a church? And then some questions about this issue of authority, because that's another topic as well. Well-written book. I think it will be very helpful to you. How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, it was inevitable that the tragic case of the Turpin's 13 starving children found in filthy conditions would be used to question the value of homeschooling. Of course, this was abuse, and the abuse of the children happened because the laws in California concerning homeschools allowed them to hide in plain sight. The vast majority of homeschooling parents are doing a great job, but it is worth taking a look at the rules and regulations so that homeschooling doesn't turn into homefooling. A few changes in the law might be warranted. After all, the Turpins were able to do all of this under the auspices of the Sandcastle Day School, which was a name they created when they filed a private school affidavit. My concern, and the concern of many homeschool parents, is this obviously extreme case will be used to clamp down on homeschooling nationwide. An article in the New Republic ominously warns that the Turpins won't be the last. An op-ed in The Week states that there is a sickening danger of homeschooling. These and other articles are a call to action for educational establishment and legislators to pass new regulations and laws that can limit or even eliminate homeschooling within a state. Let's also remind those ready to regulate homeschools of the ongoing problems in the public schools. Every few days, it seems, we hear of another scandal involving abuse or inappropriate sexual relations between teachers and students. And it's also worth reminding those regulators that homeschool students routinely outperform public school students on the standardized tests many states now want homeschoolers to take. So let's not use the tragic story of the Turpin family as a justification to over-regulate a homeschooling revolution that has become very successful. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges, Samson. Rated PG-13, Samson. In theaters February 16. Information at samson.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Clay Scroggins with us today as we talk about his book, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. It's published by Zondervan. Have information about it in multiple formats on our website, as well as his website, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And again, you are going to find this not only very helpful in terms of how it is readable, but also his great sense of humor shows up a number of times in the pages. Clay, let's, if we can, talk about this idea of identity crisis, because that's really key. And in your second chapter, you help us understand that sometimes we don't really see ourselves in the position that maybe God wants to place us in.
Yeah, as I started writing this book, Kerby, I really began with these, the book, the kind of the nuts and bolts, the majority of the book are these 4 behaviors that I am trying to apply myself. But as I started getting into those, I started thinking, you know, we all know people, and I'm guilty of this myself, who maybe are trying to find all the tips and tricks and all the different things I can apply to become a better leader. But leadership clearly is not just about a list of do's and don'ts. There's no manual to leadership. Whatever role, for everyone listening, whatever role you find yourself in today, there's no book that anyone can hand you that's going to tell you exactly how to lead well in that seat you're in. And we all know that to be true. And as I started digging into that, I started thinking, you know, that there's something deeper going on here, that in order for me to be able to lead my boss well, to lead my peers well, to lead the people that report to me well, the best way to lead is through the very gift that God's given me, which is myself. The best way to lead is to become a better leader. And that is really all about identity. It's all about how you see yourself. It's being comfortable. It's being secure in yourself. It's understanding what I'm good at and what I'm not good at. It's having the healthiest sense of identity. And identity is a squishy squishy idea. It's tough to put your hands around. It's tough to pin to a wall because it has so many different forms and facets of it. But ultimately, what I have found in my life is that my identity is best when I'm believing most about what God says about me. We all have loads of voices in our lives. We have the voice of our earthly dad, the voice of our parents, our siblings, our friends, our coworkers, our boss, our experiences, and all of those are important. But to have the most healthy form of identity is found when we turn God's voice up, when we let his voice be the loudest. And I really believe that whatever problem you have today, whatever situation you're in today, whatever you want to change, whatever new idea you want to push forward in your organization, you will do it better when you believe most what God says about you to be true. And that just, to me, is it's the most basic form of leadership, is having a clear sense of identity.
Again, the book is entitled How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And let me encourage you, if you're listening right now, want to take some notes, you might number 1 to 4, because we're going to focus a lot of time and attention on these 4 behaviors, which is the central part of the book. And there are some other chapters we might get back to a little bit later, but I want to make sure, especially since he was just talking about identity crisis, that leads we'll skip over one of the chapters to chapter 4, which is one of the 4 behaviors, and that is lead yourself. So number 1, put down lead yourself. And that is really important because as you help us understand, the buck stops with us. We need to certainly understand that he who is faithful in little things will be then judged to be faithful for many things and greater things. And so you have really a sense that before we talk about leading others, we need to have self-discipline to lead ourselves.
Yeah, that's the primary responsibility that you and I both have, Kerby, as humans, is really to lead ourselves well. And one of the challenges that I feel with people around me, people that work for me, people that I work for, is that we always want to blame someone else for the fact that we're not being led well. It's just much easier to blame our boss or to blame our situation. I know for me, I obviously work in a local church, and one of the common conversations I have is I'll stand, pastors walk around with suggestion boxes attached to them, which is, it just comes with the job and you get used to it, and I'm quite comfortable with it. So I'm standing in the lobby of our church most Sundays, and people will walk up and say, "Hey, I've got a problem that I want to talk to you about." I say, "Okay, go ahead, tell me your situation." And I'll say, "Well, I don't feel like our church is deep enough," which that's a common problem in most churches. And I'll say, "Well, tell me what you mean by that." I mean, Kerby, I graduated from Dallas Seminary, where I've experienced professors like yourself and many other smart men and women. And I would say, "Hey, listen, we can do a deep dive through the Old Testament if you're interested." And they'll say, "Yeah, let's do that." And I'll say, "Well, let me ask you, are you studying the Old Testament for yourself? Are you reading the Bible for yourself?" And they'll get offended and say, "What does that have to do with anything?" As if someone's going to spoon feed them in order for them to grow, in order for them to learn. And that's common to all of us as humans. And I remember being in high school, I wanted a set of weights. And I remember asking my dad for this weight set. This was going to cost a couple $100. And he said, "Well, hey, why don't we do this? This summer, if you will commit yourself for the next 2 months to do 50 push-ups every day for the next 2 months, I'll buy you that weight set." And you can't see me right now because we're on the radio, but I never got the weights. And I look like I never got the weights as well. And the reason why is because I wasn't able to lead myself well. And it was the principle he was trying to teach me is everything you just said, that if you can't lead yourself well, no one can lead you well. The best way to be led well is to start by leading me really, really well. We've got he's now 6, but when he was probably 4, our son came home from school, and I said, "Hey, buddy, what did you learn at school today?" And he said, "I am in charge of me." And I remember thinking, that is garbage. What do you mean you're in charge of you? I mean, that challenges a lot of my theology. But the more I started thinking about it, the more he's right. Basically, his teacher's trying to teach him that that the teacher can't keep him from hitting his friend back. The teacher can't keep him from eating his cookie before he eats his sandwich, that ultimately he's got to make a decision to do the right thing. And that's true for all of us. There's a quote that Tom Watson, former CEO of IBM, said. He said, "Nothing so conclusively proves your ability to lead other people as what you do on a day-to-day basis to lead yourself." That the key to leading other people, the key to having influence with other people, is to begin by leading yourself really, really well. So for me, as I was trying to figure out, well, how do I cultivate influence from the seat that I'm in? It begins with me deciding, hey, I'm not going to wait on my boss to lead me well. I'm going to follow well, but I'm going to begin by leading myself really, really well. So I really believe it's a key behavior in developing and cultivating the kind of influence that you and I are going to need if we're going to have any impact in the world.
I mentioned, too, that a lot of very practical things in the book, and one is a chart that you have called the Lead Me Plan, where it looks at your self-health, your social health, your spiritual health, so that, again, you can begin to have some objectives and then accountability, because that's back to whether it's doing push-ups or trying to lose weight or growing in the Christian life. There are some very helpful things that we can do individually so that we will lead ourselves well and be more effective in terms of what God has called us to do.
That's right. That's right. And I've learned most people have great intentions, and we have less follow-through than we have intention. I know that's true for my own life. I've got more aspirations than I have plans on what I'm actually going to do. So that section was just a simple exercise that I use with people that work directly for me to just say, hey, let's put the pen to the paper. Let's put some objectives together so that we can start creating a lead me plan, a plan to actually lead myself really, really well.
We need to take a break, and as we go to a break, let me just mention that we have a couple of links that would be very helpful to you. The first is you can go to clayscoggins.com. You don't even need to know how to spell it because we have the link there. And you'll find that you'll learn a little bit more about him. There's a resource section, which, of course, gives you a chance to get a copy of this book. There's a contact section in case you wanted to get in touch or have him come and speak, and a variety of other resources that are available there on his website. And, of course, as we always do, we have a link to the book, and you can find ways in which you can get paperback, hardback, Kindle, and others, and those are some resources. So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit more about what's available at his website, and we'll move ahead from this first very important principle, lead yourself. And if you're taking some notes, you might put down choose positivity. We'll get into how significant that is as a leader, and then we'll move on a little bit later to think critically and reject passivity. And so those are some very important behaviors that will help you to be a leader. And as I've said before, you may not think of yourself as a leader, but this is a book to help you, first of all, come to grips with the fact that you probably are. And even though you may not have the title to actually do leadership, you have the opportunity. And that's why the book is entitled How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. It's published by Zondervan, and we have information about that on our website, pointofview.net. As we go to a break, let me also mention that if you would like to listen to this again, you could download the podcast, or a little bit later you can go to the YouTube channel and watch it, or pass it on to someone else that might benefit from this. And as you go there, I hope you'll also click on the button that says donate, because, of course, we're dependent upon your financial gifts to bring these kinds of programs to you. Leadership, our focus in the first hour, then we'll move back into some other topics in the news, but I thought it would be helpful for you to begin to apply these leadership principles, and we'll come back with some of those right after this.
From PureFlix comes Samson, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges, from his anointing to betrayal to redemption.
My name is Samson, and you will face the wrath of God.
Samson, rated PG-13. May be inappropriate for children under 13. In theaters February 16. More information is available at samson.movie.
Missing a day of Point of View is like Samson losing his hair. Now stay with me. Without his hair, Samson was weak, and ultimately he lost his sight. Without Point of View, you miss out on encouraging news, stories of how God is using Christians to make a difference. Instead of being strengthened, you get discouraged. And Point of View helps you see places to get involved, opportunities to apply your God-given gifts for good. Never miss a program, a Viewpoints commentary, an important action item when you download the Point of View radio app, free from Google Play or iTunes. Take out your phone right now and download the Point of View radio app. See the difference you can make. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Clay Scroggins with us as we talk about his book, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge, Leveraging Influence When You Lack Authority. And if you are taking some notes, we mentioned maybe numbering from 1 to 4, looking at 4 behaviors, which is kind of the middle part of the book. There are 10 chapters, and we're just looking at the moment at kind of those middle 4 chapters. And we've already talked about lead yourself. Clay, let's talk about the second one, choose positivity. It is, I think, a truism that sometimes positive people marry, you don't necessarily say negative people, but realistic people. But what about this? It seems to me that, again, a leader needs to cast a vision. It needs to be a positive vision. It needs to be one that's realistic. So how do we kind of put that together in terms of our leadership behaviors?
Well, there's so much of me that doesn't, I hated this chapter, actually, because it feels very bubblegum. It feels, I don't know, it feels like a trite or a true, just a cliche thing to say. But the more I have experienced as a leader, and I don't think working in business or even in the church world that there's any difference in this regard, but every one of us is going to bump into situations that we don't agree with, that we don't, we just would rather not do it that way. There's meetings that we're not invited to. And what I have found is that there are decisions that are made on our behalf, particularly when we're not in charge. And this is one of the most frustrating things about not being in charge is someone else has made a decision for you that you now have to execute. And it is so imperative in those moments to learn how to bring the most amount of positive energy that you can bring to whatever it is that you're working on. And a great example of this out of the New Testament is what the Apostle Paul, the way he leads. You know, if you just read the letter of Philippians, it's a beautiful letter in and of itself, but when you realize that it's filled with so much hope and it's filled with so much longing for a better reality for the church at Philippi, and you realize that the Apostle Paul wrote it while he was in prison, chained to a Roman guard, it brings on itself this new weight. And there's a new hope that's found, I think, because you realize, hey, as bad as my situation might be today, I'm not chained to a Roman prison guard, which that's good news for every one of us. And what I have learned myself is that the most difficult time to do this is when somebody has handed me a decision that they have made. When my boss has handed me a plan and said, hey, you didn't necessarily get to weigh in on this, but I'm going to need you to buy in on this. That's difficult to do. But if we're trying to cultivate influence, if we're trying to get to the point where our voice is heard, where we're invited to the table, where we're given opportunity to speak into decisions, then we've got to learn how to bring that kind of positive energy to whatever it is that we're working on.
Well, again, just think of the difference between a person that says, okay, it's not necessarily the way I do it, but hey, let's go see how this works, versus, I can give you 15 good reasons why this is not going to work.
That's right.
And we've all been down that road, haven't we?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Kerby, I would imagine the kind of people that are attracted to your kind of show are very bright, forward-thinking, critical thinkers who have the natural ability to analyze and to think about situations and to parse out everything that all the different types of problems that there are. And because of that, I think a lot of us naturally lean toward either being a person that just oozes positivity a bit more naturally, or a person that is more analytical and has the ability to see problems sometimes. And sometimes that can get in the way, because every one of us that has a boss, every one of us has a boss that wants us to be excited about what we're working on today. I know that the people that work for me, I want them excited about what's happening today, even if they disagree with the way we're going about it. I want them to go, hey, I'm going to apply all the positive energy I can bring. I'm going to bring the kind of attitude that the Apostle Paul had chained to that guard and say, hey, as bad as this is, it's not as bad as it could be, and I believe that there's a better future, and I believe that God's still going to use us to accomplish his purposes while we're here on this earth. So it really is a mindset, and it can be a game changer for our own ability to have influence on other people.
Talking about these 4 behaviors, first one, of course, lead yourself. Second, choose positivity. The third is to think critically. Now, again, people think, well, that's probably what I'm already doing, but you even talk about it as a skill, as really even kind of the nuts and bolts of thinking. And that is, if you're going to be a leader, you also probably need to be a reader. You also need to think critically. You need to really spend some time doing some evaluation. So talk about how that actually takes place.
Yeah, the attitude of positivity is a posture. It's a way that I carry myself, that, hey, no matter how bad it gets today, I'm going to choose to bring as much energy as I can, not necessarily in an extroverted, enthusiastic way even, but just in the way that I'm believing more for what we're working on. But this third behavior, it's not just a posture, it's a skill, which is a good thing and a bad thing. The great thing about a skill is that we can get better at it. The bad thing about a skill is that to get better at it, we have to work on it. We have to actually practice it, which is not always easy to do. And critical thinking really is a skill that it couples so well with this positive energy. I saw a headline recently. I know you do a lot on trying to understand this next generation of millennials on your show. And I saw this headline of an article recently that said, millennial generation, are they a group of naive optimists or are they a group of rainbow-puking unicorns? And I thought that is probably one of the most interesting word pictures that my mind has conjured up, a rainbow-puking unicorn. But we all know people that are walking around just uber excited about what's going on today. Everything's great. Everything's awesome. Obviously, we're in a church world. On Monday, we sit in evaluation meetings. I just came out of them this morning. And there are people on our team that are just, they're just wired this way. Everything's always great. Everything's awesome. Everything's wonderful. That was terrific. That was the best sermon I've ever heard. That was the best song I've ever heard. That singer couldn't have sang it any better. Those announcements were just perfectly done. Now, that behavior alone does not cultivate influence. But if you can bring that kind of attitude with the ability to think critically, the ability to notice things, to observe what could be changed, the ability to question things, the ability to unpack something and find out what makes it work, what makes it tick, and then the ability to make connections between what you have changed and the outcome that you're looking for. People with that kind of skill naturally are invited to the table. They're given a greater platform. They're given a larger voice, a louder voice. And it's a skill that you can get better at, but you've got to have time and space in your calendar to be able to do it. So for me, what I found is that I've had to change the way I think about my day, and I've had to start getting out in front of my calendar instead of my calendar getting on top of me, which happens so often, in order for me to start learning how to get better at thinking critically and how to bring value to what I'm working on today. And if you can couple those things together, it can begin to cultivate the kind of influence that I think every one of us is looking for.
One of the things you talk about there is stop stacking your meetings, start scheduling thinking meetings. Do I run my calendar or does my calendar run me? And I remember years ago you quote Howard Hendricks in here a number of times, but Howard Hendricks at one time was with somebody and he was trying to figure out what was going wrong in his ministry, and he finally looked at him and said, you don't have any think time. You're just running from one activity to the next. Well, he said that a few decades ago. Play that out now, Clay, when we have smartphones that demand our attention 24/7. So you're going to have to be even more intentional about having think time in a 24/7 kind of news operation that almost all of us find our lives in.
Yep. Yeah, and this was a practice, Kerby, that I feel like I wish I would have applied when I was in my 20s. I think when I was in my 20s, I used to think, well, why do I need think time? That's what the boss does. The boss needs to get away and think about things. Right. I'm just responding to whatever the boss would like for me to do, and I'm just trying to get all my stuff done. But the truth is, I think I have found that my boss wants my mind engaged. My boss wants my thoughts on the problem that we're trying to solve. I think the longer you work in organizations, the longer we're alive, the more we realize that even the boss does not have it figured out. And now I am, to some people, the boss. I've still got more bosses than most people have, but I still have, but I am the boss to some people. And I realize, oh, wow, just because I'm the boss doesn't mean I have it figured out. Doesn't mean I have the solution to the problem that we're facing. And if somebody on our team came to me and said, hey, I woke up a little earlier this morning, and I spent some time thinking about the problem that we're working on. Oh, my goodness. I would be all ears. I'd say, let's sit down and talk about it. I'd love to know, what are you thinking about the problem we're working on? I just love to know that people are thinking about the problems that we're facing as an organization, because it tells me that they're engaged. It tells me that their minds are engaged. It tells me that their heart is engaged. But you're right. We've got to have time in our calendar to do that, which means we've got to maybe wake up earlier, maybe start putting some time between our meetings, but giving ourselves some time to sit down at a blank notebook, asking the question, what am I learning? How can I get better? How can I work? How can I help somebody else fix a problem that they're facing? And that's not easy to do, but I believe when we begin to do that, we begin to think more critically.
How to lead when you're not in charge. We've looked at 3 of the 4 behaviors. We'll pick up that 4th one right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Smithsonian Institution has appointed its first curator of religion in over 100 years. Peter Manseau, the new curator, explains that you can't tell the story of America without the role of religion in it. According to Manseau, among the first exhibits to be displayed will be a church bell crafted by Paul Revere, Thomas Jefferson's Bible that cut out the portions he did not believe, a manuscript from the Book of Mormon, a Muslim text that once belonged to an African slave, and even a Torah scroll damaged by Hessians during the War for Independence. Manseau also intends to display a compass used by Roger Williams to find his way to Rhode Island when he was exiled from Massachusetts for his religious beliefs, a display that Manseau hopes will help Americans ponder what religious liberty looked like in the context of the founding of our country. The new curator is right. You cannot tell the story of America without telling the role religion has played in making our country what it is today. And that includes the role of religious liberty. These artifacts from our history point to the real stories of Americans committed to the historically radical idea that government respect a person's right to honor his conscience before God. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes with Clay Scroggins as we talk about the book, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge, Leveraging Influence When You Lack Authority, is published by Zondervan. Look for it in your local bookstore, but we also have a number of links that you can easily follow on our website, pointofview.net. We've looked at a couple of behaviors. Number 1, lead yourself. Number 2, choose positivity. Number 3, think critically. And for number 4, if you haven't written this down, write down reject passivity. That's an important one as well, because sometimes it is easy to say, I'll just let this one go. It'll probably work its way out. Sometimes it does. Oftentimes it doesn't. What would you have us learn in terms of that particular behavior?
Yeah, Kerby, the reason why this is so important to me is because when I'm not, I have found that when I lack authority, when I'm not as in charge as I wish I was, I can easily feel out of control. I can feel like, well, I'm not the ultimate decision maker. That's my boss's job. My boss is the one who's ultimately responsible. And so I'm just here sitting on my hands, waiting on the boss to say, hey, here's where we're going next. The danger with that is that when we feel out of control, it's very easy for us to become passive. It's very easy for us to become somebody who, like you said earlier, doesn't necessarily feel like that's my responsibility, or why should I pay attention to that, or I'll just let that one slide, or I'll let that go. And if we're going to cultivate influence, if we're going to be the kind of person that has enough sway to be invited to the table, then we've got to learn to reject that passivity. We've got to learn to take initiative and pick up things, whether it's we see the importance of it or not, whether our boss has even asked us to or not. And that's not easy to do, but it really can become a discipline that we can begin to live out in our own life. And as we do that, I believe we really do begin to cultivate more influence, and we can begin to step into the kind of leadership that I believe that God has put inside of all of us to do.
You know, in the last,
really important for me.
Yeah, in the last couple of chapters, you talk about this idea, part 3, challenging authority. Now, you don't mean that in the sense that sometimes people would take it, but you do talk about this idea of challenge up, and you even kind of break down this idea of challenge up. What does that mean?
Well, what I started thinking through as I finished these 4 behaviors for myself is I started thinking, oh no, I probably need to have a hard conversation with my boss. And I would imagine, and I've heard this from readers as well, that people oftentimes get through this and go, oh no, now I've got an idea that I now feel burdened with, as opposed to an idea that I have tabled or that I have been sitting on, and I now need to execute on it. And so oftentimes we've got that tricky situation where we feel like I need to walk into my boss's office and have a difficult conversation. And so they were really just 2 chapters on how to have a difficult conversation with our boss. Those kinds of high stakes, there's a lot on the line, emotions are high conversations, I have found are really the make it or break it moments in leadership. They're the moments where I either gain more influence or I end up losing the whatever influence that I had. And so if we can learn as leaders who do not have as much authority as we wish we had, if we can learn to handle those conversations well, then we end up cultivating more influence for ourselves, and we can become, I believe we can have more influence as leaders.
And again, sometimes those are fearful conversations. They're right up there or down there, depending on how you look at it, with asking for a raise or a variety of other things. As you say, it's just really kind of a high-stakes kind of conversation that a lot of us would rather avoid, right?
And that's what most people do. I feel like the most common problem with difficult conversations is that we avoid them. But, most of us have been in the situation long enough where we feel like, hey, I have been in this position too long where I'm either going to move on to another spot or I'm going to have this difficult conversation. And that's a tough spot to be in. But if you can approach the conversation with a little bit of preparation and approach the conversation with a bit of humility and an open mind and some curiosity about what you don't know, and then begin by letting your boss know, hey, I care about you as a person, and I, as much as I can, I believe in you, and I'm glad to be working on what we're working on. If you can begin with that, oftentimes it neutralizes the emotions and allows you to find some safety, to create some common ground, and those conversations can begin with way less tension than they may have otherwise.
Just before we go, let's talk about how people could use this book. Obviously, this is intended primarily for a book that an individual would read, but if you wanted to teach a class, and every once in a while I've been encouraged to teach a class on leadership, it's Lead Like Jesus, and it's a lot of the books that you would imagine, whether it's Drucker or Maxwell or whatever, but I think this would now be a whole section, maybe a whole session or 2 on how to lead when you're not in charge. So how can people use these resources?
Well, there's probably the easiest way would would be through a study guide that we're releasing at the end of April through Zondervan that has some, I think it's got 6 teaching videos that go along with it that could set up conversation. And then it's got a study guide that would go along with anybody who wanted to facilitate this in a work group, either with your organization or with your staff or with your team at church or your team at work, or with your just associates that you work with, or even in small groups. We've seen a lot of people do that as well. And then if you go to the website, clayscroggins.com, we've got, I've got a lot of interviews, Kerby, that I've done with some leaders who are the boss, people like Andy Stanley or Louis Giglio here in Atlanta, as well as a couple of business leaders. One of them is a good friend of mine named Frank Blake, who is the former CEO of the Home Depot. And Frank has an interesting background because he was never the point leader of any organization until he became the CEO of the Home Depot. So he had a lot to say about this topic because of his experience working for Jack Welch at GE and George Bush and both President Bushes in government work. But anyway, all of those interviews have been helpful for people that I have found to tee up conversation in groups.
And again, let me just mention at clayscroggins.com. There's also an opportunity for you to take an online assessment and find out your influence score. A lot of resources, a contact point in case you'd like to maybe have Clay come and speak to your group or maybe give you some advice in your particular church. So, Clay, I appreciate, first of all, the fact that you've written this book, and I appreciate, as busy as I know you are, giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
Oh, I'm glad to do it, Kerby. And my heart genuinely is to help people begin to lead better. I think Bill Hybels, I've heard him say it a few times, but when the leader gets better, everybody wins. And that's just true. I know that when I get better, it sure helps my wife, helps my kids, and it definitely helps our church, helps the people that I work with. So I'm on a quest to become a better leader, and I hope that others will, I'm sure, will join me as well.
Well, again, I'll say hello to everybody at North Point Community Church, and thank you for giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Glad to do it. Thanks, Kerby.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to get into some of the issues in the news. Sean McDowell will be with us a little bit later, so we'll talk with him by phone, but first we'll get into some of the topics. Oh, yes, that FISA memo, we got to get back to that, and we've posted a couple of articles on that, and I'll sort out some of that, and also give you a chance to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me also encourage you to go to the website, pointofview.net. There is an opportunity for you to listen to the interview again. You can download the podcast or you can watch it. You may know somebody who's in a position of leadership or maybe even a position where they're not in a position of leadership or they're frustrated and they would benefit from a book on how to lead when you're not in charge. And so take the time to forward it to them. And that is certainly one of the resources we want to make available to you as we can equip you to be more effective. As you go there, I hope you'll also recognize we are dependent upon your financial gifts to bring this program to you. So if you can click on the button that says donate and help us out, we'd appreciate that too. Let's take a break. We'll get back into the news. We'll talk a little bit later with Sean McDowell, all of it coming up in the second hour, right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today. If you'd like to join our conversation, let's open up the phones. We, in the first hour, talk with Clay Scroggins, how to lead when you're not in charge. Let's get back into the news. And obviously, the big issue in the news is the so-called FISA memo. So, again, let me give you some basics on that and do some follow-up. The first, of course, is this memo, which came from Representative Devin Nunes, and he is the head of the House Intelligence Committee, has created all sorts of flap. First, there was all sorts of pushback saying it shouldn't be released. Now that it's been released, some of the critics have said it's a nothing burger, it's nothing at all. But we really are in a very dangerous point in terms of partisan politics. Because on the one hand, you have those primarily Republicans and conservatives and others that are convinced that the Russian investigation is going nowhere. It's maybe even a scam. It's been cooked up by the deep state bureaucrats, and that this was just an attempt to topple a duly elected president. And this memo gives complete vindication to the fact that that's what was taking place. And you'll see some of that on Fox News. Sean Hannity's certainly been on the forefront of all of that. On the other hand, if you turn on like CNN or MSNBC, you're going to have this argument that millions of Americans are convinced that the sitting president stole an election and that this memo has nothing to do with that. It's just a complete distraction from an honest evaluation of what might have taken place. Now, the bottom line is that, as we pointed out on Friday, this is a memo that comes from one individual, probably agreed to by some others on the House Intelligence Committee. And I think wisdom and prudence says you wait till the rest of the facts come out. But I think the argument that could be very compellingly made is it's time to release more than just the memo. It's time to release the FISA documents. David French, in a column that came out a couple of weeks ago, said that. Today I saw Louis Gohmert, who's been on this program and has actually served as a guest host on this program as well as a co-host, has said the same thing, and let people evaluate it for itself. But one of the articles I've posted, the first article we have, of course, is about the book that we did the interview on in the first hour. The second article there is called A Flaw in the Memo. And this comes also from David French, who, again, by the way, has been on this program. And he actually says that this memo and the information from it really begins to challenge some of the arguments that were made. And it relates back to one of the callers that came in on Friday that said, well, read the last paragraph of the memo. We let Penna read it. But at the time, I wasn't sure where we were going with that. But now I think I understand, and you can read it. It's an entirety in which he points out that actually at the end of last year, 2017, the New York Times published a scoop that claimed that the investigation that we're talking about right now, the Mueller investigation, began, and the investigation of the Trump campaign began not because of this dossier by Christopher Steele, the phony dossier kind of opposition research, but because of what happened with George Papadopoulos. And so that has been something that the New York Times has posted for some time. And what David French points out is, with this newly released memo, it really confirms the Times scoop. and it has to do with looking at the timeline. Now, this is a 3-page article. Not going to go through all of it. If you are interested in the details, you can go to the article we've posted on the website. But he says the memo alleges in some detail that senior FBI officials knew of the political origins of the Steele dossier, yet failed to disclose them. So the point he's making is this could be a both and rather than an either or. Some people are saying, well, indeed, this shows that there is some kind of malfeasance on the part of the FBI. That may be true. But if you look at the timeline, which is in the final paragraph of the memo, it shows that the investigation actually may have begun before that. So in his kind of third to the last paragraph, he says, from the beginning of the Russian investigation, it has always been the case that two things could be true at once. FBI agents could have engaged in misconduct. You think? Yeah, we talked a lot about that on Friday. Kelly Shackelford gave us a pretty good look at that. And the Russian investigation could be legitimate, necessary, and based on information not obtained through the Democratic opposition research, but through legitimate intelligence gathering methods. So wanted to follow that up because we did have a caller bring that up on Friday, and we have certainly wanted to give some credence to that particular paragraph that appears in the memo. If you said, I want to read the memo for myself, good news is we posted it on Friday. It's still available on our website, pointofview.net. Now, let's come to that other issue because Hans von Spakovsky, who is an individual that has worked in the administration in a variety of different ways, previous administrations, said that the formerly secret memo released Friday by Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee raises serious questions about the judgment and the actions of a handful of current and former senior officials at the FBI and the Justice Department. And he says that the key question in their dealings with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, called FISA, to gain permission to actually do surveillance of Carter Page, did the FBI and the Justice Department fail in their duty to actually provide candor to the judge because they did not explain that this is opposition research paid for by the DNC and Hillary Clinton's campaign? And it also is really raising the question, why were we allowing this kind of surveillance? The FISA court is really for terrorists primarily, and to actually begin to manipulate that to actually surveil an American citizen who was part of the Trump campaign, more as an advisor, but okay, he was part of the campaign as an advisor. That raises some really deep questions that we've talked about in this program before. We used to be very concerned about invasion of privacy, but it seems to be less of an issue right now. And then, of course, the whole issue is, as he said, that we also have the situation in which Andrew McCabe testified last December that the agencies would not have sought a surveillance warrant without this dossier, the memo states. And James Comey also testified that the dossier's claim were salacious and unverified, yet the FISA court was not informed about this. So even as I passed on some of this information to Kelly Shackelford, who was with us last Friday, he said that doesn't take away the fact that we still seem to have some inaccuracies, malfeasance, maybe some manipulation that has been taking place in the Justice Department. And as he pointed out before, we're not talking about everybody in the Justice Department. We're not talking about everybody in the FBI, but we are talking about some people on the 7th floor who need to be encouraged to seek employment elsewhere. Probably a nice way to say that. And he said one would think, this again is Hans von Spakovsky saying, one would think that senior law officials and senior law enforcement officials would have realized they had a professional duty to tell the court about the origins of the dossier about Christopher Steele himself, since the information was readily and relevant to the credibility of the information drawn from it. So that gives you a little bit of a look at this. I'm going to spend a lot of time on this memo, but later in the week we'll probably do a complete analysis of it. When we come back, though, Sean McDowell with us. We have some great resources to begin to educate you and your children and grandchildren. Be talking with him about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, it was inevitable that the tragic case of the Turpin's 13 starving children found in filthy conditions would be used to question the value of homeschooling. Of course, this was abuse, and the abuse of the children happened because the laws in California concerning homeschools allowed them to hide in plain sight. The vast majority of homeschooling parents are doing a great job, but it is worth taking a look at the rules and regulations so that homeschooling doesn't turn into homefooling. A few changes in the law might be warranted. After all, the Turpins were able to do all of this under the auspices of the Sandcastle Day School, which was a name they created when they filed a private school affidavit. My concern, and the concern of many homeschool parents, is this obviously extreme case will be used to clamp down on homeschooling nationwide. An article in the New Republic ominously warns that the Turpins won't be the last. An op-ed in The Week states that there is a sickening danger of homeschooling. These and other articles are a call to action for educational establishment and legislators to pass new regulations and laws that can limit or even eliminate homeschooling within a state. Let's also remind those ready to regulate homeschools of the ongoing problems in the public schools. Every few days, it seems, we hear of another scandal involving abuse or inappropriate sexual relations between teachers and students. And it's also worth reminding those regulators that homeschool students routinely outperform public school students on the standardized tests many states now want homeschoolers to take. So let's not use the tragic story of the Turpin family as a justification to over-regulate a homeschooling revolution that has become very successful. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From PureFlix, the biblical story of the last of the Hebrew judges, Samson. Rated PG-13, Samson. In theaters February 16. Information at samson.movie.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
One of the things we're going to be talking about now for at least one or two segments is the whole area of apologetics, how we can defend the Christian faith. And more importantly, we're going to talk about youth apologetics, because it's really crucial that at a very young age we give young people evidence for their faith. If you've listened to any of the broadcasts we've done in the past, surveys that have been done by George Barna, or interviews we've done with Ken Ham at Answers for Genesis, and a variety of others, you recognize that young people at a younger and younger age are being challenged to reconsider their Christian faith. And Hillary Ferrer, who actually has what's called Mama Bear Apologetics, put it this way. She said one of the greatest pleasures for her is seeing parachurch organizations recognize the need for youth apologetics training. She said, anyone unfamiliar with my personal journey, our head pastor did 2 series when I was in the 7th grade that changed my life. One was the C.S. Lewis trilemma. You probably have heard that before. Was Jesus a Lord, liar, lunatic, and you've heard that. Or the evidences for resurrection, where he went through every alternative theory proposed by skeptics and dismantled the argument. She said, I was in the 7th grade, 12 years old, and these 2 series, she says, literally changed my life. And I think illustrated out the fact that because we live in a world of social media, we live in a world where young people can end up on all sorts of internet websites, some of which are really challenging their faith. It's really important to begin to know how to find some of those resources. And so one of the things that we're going to be talking about as soon as we're able to make connection with Sean McDowell is this new series which is come out through Awana. And first of all, let me just give high marks to Awana, because they have this apologetics curriculum called Advocates, and you can find that on the website. Matter of fact, one of the things I would encourage you to do is to watch the trailer and then to pass that on to others, because I think it does a very good job of helping you see what we are talking about here. There's a 32-week study, and then there's the smaller sort of breakout 8-week studies. One which, for example, is called Examine, and that's looking at biblical evidence. There's one called Explore, and that's looking at the whole issue of science and culture and those kinds of things. You also have one called Speak the Truth in Love, which is very helpful, and then one for Search for Meaning. And so you can either have the entire series, which are 32 weeks, or the 8-week series. And this is just a very well-done, multi-dimensional approach. And so we are privileged to have with us now Dr. Sean McDowell, a very gifted communicator, an individual, of course, has been on the program with us many times before, is either the author or co-author or editor of over 18 different books. And this new series out by Awana, Advocates, an apologetics curriculum. Sean McDowell, always great to have you on the program with us.
Kerby, thanks for having me on, my friend.
Let's talk about this. I've been aware of this because I followed you on Facebook and saw you on seashores and at mountaintops being photographed. But there's a 32-week study as well as some of these 8-week studies. But talk about how this is a resource that I think will really be used by anybody inside or outside the church to help prepare young people to meet the challenges that they're going to face in the 21st century.
Well, this resource is really a dream come true for me in the sense that I've always wanted to make a comprehensive, thoughtful, top-quality, systematic apologetics resource for students. In other words, I've taught in high school for 15 years, and I said, how can I multiply myself and help a parent, a youth leader, a grandparent, a coach, a teacher, just have the best apologetics training for students? So Awana actually approached me and said, hey, we're redoing all of our curriculum. Would you help us for a year develop apologetics and worldview? And we've got curriculum writers, graphic designers, film producers. And I said, are you kidding me? Like, you had me at hello. I'm in. So we spent weeks on this, Kerby, sitting down just saying, what topics do we have to cover? How do we cover them? What does Scripture teach on these topics? How do we apply it to kids' lives? And we set up 32 weeks. So if somebody says they are serious, and I think every parent or youth pastor should be, about training their kids in worldview and apologetics, they could go 32 weeks through this. Now, I also realize there's a lot of people who say, man, I don't have 32 weeks. So we broke them up into 4 8-week series, where if that's all somebody has or they want to try it out first, they could look at the topics, and they could take a young person through these 8 weeks and really just help them to understand and defend their faith.
Let's see if we can go through each one of the sections. Again, 32 weeks on everything for evidences for God and evidence for Jesus and the resurrection and archaeology and prophecy and all sorts of other issues. But one of those that's already available is called Examine Biblical Evidence. And that's where you, as well as other individuals you talk with, it looks like J. Warner Wallace, of course, your dad, and others, talk about what is actually covered in those 8 weeks.
So that's one where we're specifically looking at the Scriptures, how we know it's true, how it's trustworthy, how Jesus rose from the grave, how he fulfilled prophecy. And if I can take a step back for a second, what we did is we started with the first 8 where we just said, what is apologetics? Do kids need to know how to defend their faith?
Sure.
What is biblical faith? Is faith blind? What is truth? I mean, the word of the year 2 years ago was, post-truth. Can we even know truth? So we start off just laying the groundwork saying, all right, here's the most important thing a kid needs to even have to begin approaching this. And then we start building a systematic case. We have another unit, which is on worldviews. We look at naturalism and pantheism. We look at monotheism, and then we start asking the question, okay, there's these different worldviews. How would we know that one or any of them are true? So we look at the scientific evidence from DNA and fine-tuning. And then after that, we specifically get into the scriptures and the person of Jesus, which you were asking about. Because we've already shown a kid there's such a thing as truth. Here's how you use your mind to find it. We know naturalism is false. There's good reason to believe there's a God who's spoken. Now let's look at the evidence for the Bible to see that God has uniquely spoken through the Christian worldview. So that's how we want a kid to not just know the Bible's true, answer the problem of evil, know what faith is. I want them to see how all these things connect in their mind so they can build a comprehensive worldview.
So again, one is called Explore, which is kind of science and culture, which you've alluded to. Another one's called Examine. And one of the things I always suggest, Sean, is for our listeners to go to our website. There's a link there to the trailer, which is about 2.5 minutes long, and to watch it, and then click the share button and put it on your Facebook page, send it to someone, maybe you know the youth pastor at your church, and say, this is something I think we would want to do, either the 32-week study or the 8-week studies, and begin to pass on some of the information we're talking about here. And as they watch it, the first thing they're going to notice, Sean, is great production values. This is not Sean McDowell sitting in a room talking head. This is at the seashore. It's on the mountains. It's with a backpack. It's in a movie theater. It's talking to other individuals. This is something that I believe really would keep the attention of young people who desperately need to be able to know how to defend their faith in a much more hostile culture. Wouldn't you agree?
I think you just nailed what sets this curriculum apart is we, myself and Awana, spared no expense with this. So when I'm teaching, for example, on the worldview of pantheism, we went up into the forest and filmed it there. Because you see movies like Avatar and Pocahontas, how nature is alive, and you see it in the Star Wars films. So we wanted to film it in the forest. I talk about beauty. This is one of my favorite ones, where I talk about the existence of beauty points towards there being a divine artist. So we film it in a beautiful rose garden. I have one section where I'm talking about story and how we tell stories and we see our lives as stories. And that's because there is a grand storyteller. There's a God. This isn't a chaotic world. We are really a part of a story, and the Bible captures this. So we film it in a movie theater. So it's really not only the words that we use, but the experience students are on going with us will really help make those connections in their minds.
Well, and again, just before you came on, I was reading from Hillary Ferrar, and of course I've worked with her husband as well as her, talking about, back in the 7th grade, the C.S. Lewis, Lord Liar, Lunatic, and the Resurrection were so profound that even at 12 years of age, 7th grade, that was important. And you know only as well as I do how important it is now to have youth-oriented apologetics, and you and J. Warner Wallace and a few others have done a very good job. Lee Strobel, some others have done a job of trying to provide that, and that's a question I get so often, and I know how I'm going to answer that question now. I'm going to say, well, are you familiar with the Awana Advocates program? But let's take a break, and we'll come back and talk about some of the other resources, how you can use the resources, and if you'd like to know a little bit more, we have a link not only to Sean McDowell, but also to Awana on our website, pointofview.net. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
With the way things are going right now, there's got to be a source of truth somewhere.
Eric lives in California, and he's listened to Point of View since he was a child hanging around his dad's auto shop in Nevada. He says it's his only trustworthy source of information about what's happening in the world.
Well, I feel bad because I have not been donating, and I'll tell you what, I'm getting back to that because just recently I realized with all the junk going on with all the media, with all these news things, the only one that I count on is you guys, and what would I do if you guys weren't there? I don't know what I'd do. Where would I get my news? And I would be dead in water. So I got to do my part.
Make sure you do your part, like Eric. Join the Truth Team. Get all the details by calling 1-800-347-5151 or visit online, pointofview.net/team. Support the truth and make a difference for the future. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation with Dr. Sean McDowell for a few more minutes. Again, last time we had him on, we talked about his book, The Fate of the Apostles, and of course, this new edition of The Evidence That Demands a Verdict, as well as The Beauty of Intolerance, Same-Sex Marriage, A New Kind of Apologist, and many, many other books, 18 different books that he's either written, co-authored, or edited. And so again, the Apologetics Bible, and this one is a resource that I would encourage all of you that have young people to obtain. It's something I would encourage you to actually pass on to your youth pastor, your senior pastor, a 32-week study called Advocates, or it's also broken down into 4 8-week studies on science and culture, on biblical evidence, on speaking the truth in love, and on meaning. And we'll get into some more of that in just a minute. But Sean McDowell, also we have a link to your website, seanmcdowell.org. Talk about what's available at your website, because in addition to these resources, people can see some of the conversations you've had on homosexuality with Matthew Vines, some of the various blog posts, video posts, and other resources. So what will they find when they land on your website?
Well, I look at my website as a ministry to people. So Twitter, occasionally I'll post funny stuff, but the vast majority are articles, studies, resources, and books for parents, teachers, students who just want to go deeper in their worldview. A lot like what you do, Kerby, for sure. I have a ton of articles on there. There's short videos. Every week I do a 2-minute video where I just answer a tough question that somebody sends in. So a lot of youth pastors use those with their students, or parents show them to their kids to spark conversation. There's links to the books. And you mentioned right at the top, what I put there today was a public conversation I just had with Matthew Vines, who is a, quote, gay Christian who argues that the Bible is okay with certain kinds of same-sex unions. And I strongly disagree with that and think he's not accurately handling the scriptures. And so we just had a big conversation just this past Wednesday, and I'll be posting that later today. So I would urge parents, youth pastors to look at that, talk with it about their kids, because that is one of the huge issues of our day. And a lot of people just don't know how to think Christianly about it, and I think are being taken in by ideas that are contrary to what the scriptures teach. So SeanMcDowell.org is really just designed to be a resource to help people go deeper in their faith.
Again, that is one of the links on the website. We also, of course, have a link to this curriculum through Awana, and you can follow the links there. There's also getadvocates.org to get a sample. And let's talk about the others, because I mentioned science and culture, I mentioned biblical evidence, but you also have some on Speak the Truth in Love and a search for meaning. And even though I'm just now starting to get into that, I think that's an important issue as well, because if all we are is a random series of molecules, and it's just mass, energy, chance, and time that creates this, why is it we're so looking for meaning if indeed there is no meaning according to a naturalistic worldview? I think that's another very compelling apologetic argument for the truthfulness of the scriptures.
Oh, I'm with you 100%. And ironically, when people run around saying the world is meaningless, it has no meaning. Well, meaninglessness is parasitic upon meaning. You can't have meaninglessness unless there's first a sense of meaning to even get that idea. And that's because people who embrace a worldview that says there's no meaning are still made in the image of a God who gives their lives and this world meaning. They can't avoid it. So in this section, what we're doing is Kerby, we sat down and we know the standard apologetic topics, the problem of evil, reliability of the Bible, resurrection. We knew we were going to cover those, but we sat down and we said, do you think we could, with high school students, talk about free will? And I don't mean Calvinism or Arminianism. I mean the fact that we actually have free will points to there being an agent who made us with free will. Do you think we could talk about beauty and story? And we're like, you know what? We got to do this, because this will not only resonate with the minds of students, it'll resonate with their hearts. So that's what this section does. We really, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about beauty in the world and it pointing towards a divine artist, I think is such a powerful reason to believe in God, because everybody looks at a waterfall or a sunset and says, that's beautiful. as if beauty is a part of that object itself. Well, like you said, in a meaningless world where there's only chemicals, what on earth is beauty? But if there is a God who is beautiful and has infused human beings and this world with beauty, then we would expect to see beauty in the world. So we're trying to help students understand that there's signposts all around the world if they're open their eyes up to it, and realize that the Christian worldview really makes the most sense of reality as we experience it.
Let's talk about some of the products and how people can use them. I have in front of me here the Leader's Guide, and there is a large group Leader's Guide. This one, by the way, is no small amount, 260 pages. Then there's a small group discussion guide, which has bonus materials like videos and presentation slides and the rest. And then there's, of course, a Bible study on weekly topics, as well as various essentials. For just a few minutes, Sean, talk about how if we already have a youth leader or a pastor or even maybe a Sunday school leader who would like to use this, or even parents that would like to use this in their homes or homeschool, how can they use some of the resources that Awana's put together?
So some of the different people we've heard from that are using this are youth pastors with their students. We've had parents working with their own kids. We've had homeschool families kind of use it at the Bible study in a co-op with other students. We've had just individuals mentor other people with this kind of material. Now, as you look on there, we packaged it differently. So the top tier, so to speak, would be for the really motivated student. And a lot of the Awana students we have are just super motivated, which I love. We've put together where each day there's something small that they can do with a workbook. Look up a passage and meditate upon it. Brainstorm or search something on the net, or read this quick Bible study that ties to that week's topic. And with each week, there's a video that we made. It's usually of me. I also interview my father, Josh McDowell, J. Warner Wallace, but usually it's me teaching, anywhere from like 8 to 12 minutes. Top quality, like you said. So there's these workbooks for somebody who's really motivated, wants to go day by day and go deeper. But we've also done a little easier way where if somebody goes, gosh, my students aren't going to study this every day. I have one 45-minute lesson per week with these students. But we've also set it up in a way where they can just kind of plug and play and then create discussion and help their students to learn this material. So whether you have a ton of time with kids or just a little bit, I think you'll find that it's easy to use this and tailor it to your needs. But the last thing I would say, one of the ways I designed this is I want when parents and youth pastors and teachers take their students through this, they are going to build their own worldview as well.
Yes.
Because studies show a lot of people in Christian churches don't have a Christian worldview. So if they take students through this, they're going to start learning it themselves and really own it.
Well, we know that any of us that teach it, we usually learn more than anybody listening to it. And I might just mention that, again, for the kids that want to go deeper, you recommend books that we've done interviews on this program. You mentioned J. Warner Wallace, for example, Cold Case Christianity and God's Crime Scene, or C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity, or The Privileged Planet by Guillermo Gonzalez and Jay Richards, or No God But One, Allah, Jesus by Nabil Qureshi. So there are opportunities for you to just play the videos. There are opportunities for you to go deeper. There are other books that are recommended. This Leader's Guide, 260 pages of great resources. So whether it's a small group, whether it's a large group, or a Bible study, or the essentials, just great resources. And again, we have a link that you can follow, which will take you to the resources. You just click on the button there that says Advocates. Again, my assignment to you is to watch the 2.5-minute trailer, and it just gives you a real good overview real quickly of what that looks like. Then there's a place where you can request a sample of the Advocates curriculum, and I would encourage you to watch the trailer, to pass it on to others, educate them as well. And Sean, I am just delighted that you have put this together, and let's make this not the only interview we do on it, but next time we get together, let's see if we can talk about how some of these various churches and groups have been able to use it. And I want to give it as much publicity as possible because there's such a need for youth apologetics, and I thank you and Awana for putting it together for us.
Well, thanks, Kerby. You are a huge supporter and a champion, so I will come on anytime and help however I can.
Well, we're looking forward to that. I noticed in your schedule you're going to be near here a little bit later in the year, so maybe we can get you in studio. If not, we'll do it by phone. But again, I wanted you to know real quickly about Dr. Sean McDowell putting together, I think, a series that you need. And so often I have people come up and they say, you have something for young people? And the answer is yes, and it is extremely well done, and you need to find out more about that. So again, lots of resources on our website, pointofview.net. We have a link to Sean McDowell's website and a link to our good friends at Awana for this new series called Advocates. Let's take a break, though. When we come back, we'll wind down the program for today. I've got a couple other comments from some of the articles that have posted on the website and things that you need to know about, including my commentary for today. So we'll talk about that right after these important messages.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Smithsonian Institution has appointed its first curator of religion in over 100 years. Peter Manseau, the new curator, explains that you can't tell the story of America without the role of religion in it. According to Manseau, among the first exhibits to be displayed will be a church bell crafted by Paul Revere, Thomas Jefferson's Bible that cut out the portions he did not believe, a manuscript from the Book of Mormon, a Muslim text that once belonged to an African slave, and even a Torah scroll damaged by Hessians during the War for Independence. Manseau also intends to display a compass used by Roger Williams to find his way to Rhode Island when he was exiled from Massachusetts for his religious beliefs, a display that Manseau hopes will help Americans ponder what religious liberty looked like in the context of the founding of our country. The new curator is right. You cannot tell the story of America without telling the role religion has played in making our country what it is today. And that includes the role of religious liberty. These artifacts from our history point to the real stories of Americans committed to the historically radical idea that government respect a person's right to honor his conscience before God. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
More people today are saying Americans don't really need religion, but America does need religion. Religion helps the economy, families, and even national security. Learn more by reading Saving America, 10 Reasons Religious Freedom is the Key to Our Nation's Future. You can download this free booklet at firstliberty.org/Saving America. That's firstliberty.org/Saving America. Discover 10 ways religion benefits America at firstliberty.org/Saving America.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
You know, we were talking about apologetics and worldview, and I just might mention tomorrow that M.D. Perkins is be with us. American Family Association's put together a very important series on the God who speaks, and in the second hour we have John Dickerson, and we'll be talking with him about his book, A Doubter's Guide to Jesus. So we're going to spend a little bit of time tomorrow kind of picking up on some of the themes here, the need for us to be able to articulate a biblical worldview, and to know how to defend it, and that's certainly what we talk about so often here at Point of View. Just before we move on to some other topics, let me just mention again, this Advocate series is just so well done. It helps individuals develop the kind of defenses for the biblical faith. It has got a lot of practical leadership skills. It helps condense a lot of apologetics research into a nice conversational tone. Lots of great resources that come, of course, from Sean McDowell, Josh McDowell, his father, J. Warner Wallace, and others, and then just recommending a lot of the books that we over the years have talked about here on Point of View. So let me encourage you to find out more. And again, we have a link to the information, and the trailer, as I've said, is about 2.5 minutes long. Won't take long for you to watch it. And then I would encourage you to click that share button and put it on your Facebook page if you have it, or on a blog, or send it to someone. Or if you don't have access to a computer, call up your pastor or your youth leader and say, I'm really concerned about these young people going off to college. They sometimes don't know how to defend their faith. This looks like a really good series. It doesn't cost a great deal of money. It has got great production values, and it would be just something we could begin to do and use within our own church setting. And for those of you that are homeschooling parents, or those of you that have various kinds of co-ops, this is, again, a resource that I hope you'll take advantage of right here at Point of View. Speaking of homeschools and co-ops and things like that, my commentary today is about homeschooling and abuse. And the reason I wrote it is because we've all been following this tragic story out of California of the Turpin family, these starving children that went through such horrific circumstances. And we recognize that there is certainly going to be a call for reevaluating some of the rules and regulations and laws that exist, because, after all, they were able to, in some respects, hide in plain sight. And the Turpins were able to do this under the auspices of what was called the Sandcastle Day School, which, frankly, was just a name they made up that they put on a private school affidavit. And so I recognize that we're going to probably have to reevaluate some of the rules and laws and regulations and requirements for homeschooling. But let's be careful, because we also know that there are those who have always opposed homeschooling. There was an article in the New Republic, "The Turpins Won't Be the Last," and then the one in the week, which is probably the most dangerous, "The Sickening Danger of Homeschooling." It's very obvious where he stands on that issue. And so I'm fearful that in the obvious need to maybe reevaluate some of these regulations, some of these requirements, and some of these laws, this could be used by the educational establishment and legislators to pass new regulations and laws that could limit or even eliminate homeschooling. So let's, if nothing else, as this takes place, first of all, remind those individuals that want to regulate homeschools out of existence that it's not exactly like we aren't having problems in the public schools. Seems like almost every day we hear about various scandals about inappropriate sexual relations between teachers and students. Let's remind them that almost every time there have been attempts to provide any kind of oversight, that those regulators need to be reminded that if you look at these standardized tests that are given both to homeschoolers and to kids in the public schools, usually the homeschool kids do better. And so this should certainly require that we reevaluate what's happening, but let's not use this as a justification to overregulate or even eliminate some of the homeschools. And my commentary today is all about that, and you can read it in its entirety at pointofview.net. One of the other articles that came out, and maybe we'll get to this later in the week, comes from Robert Knight, which is entitled "Why Government Must Be Tamed," and it appeared in the Washington Times. And what he did this time, instead of writing out $20 trillion in national debt, he wrote it out with all the zeros. And this these zeros just go on and on and on, and talks about the fact that if you've ever seen the U.S. debt clock, and if you haven't, you can just go to usdebtclock.org, real simple, and it shows the debt going up all the time. And it was actually put together by a real estate magnate by the name of Seymour Durst. And he began that when the national debt was at about $2.7 trillion, only $2.7 trillion. By 1991, it was ticking upward at $13,000 per second, and the amount was accumulating so fast that really the last 7 digits were almost impossible to even see because they were just flying past there. Well, in 2008, they had to revamp it again because they had to add another digit, because by that time you got to the Bush administration and we had a $10 trillion deficit. Up until that point, we had $1 trillion, $2 trillion, $3 trillion, all the way up to $9 trillion, but then $10 trillion. And over the next 8 years of the Obama administration, it went from $10 trillion to $20 trillion. And so we obviously have a need to address this issue. And as I pointed out the other day, it hasn't been something that most people have wanted to talk about. Think about this. During the last presidential campaign, did you ever hear Hillary Clinton talk about it? No. Did you ever really hear Donald Trump talk about it? No. So the leading candidates on both sides just wanted to sort of ignore a $20 trillion debt. And sometimes the few people that bring it up are then immediately criticized because they will then want to reduce the size and scope of government, which I think makes a pretty good sense. In this article, Robert Knight quotes from Frank Zappa. This may be the first time on Point of View we quote from Frank Zappa, but he says the late rock star at one time said, I think they're trying to take over the country, and he was referring to the federal government, and that might be the case. But nevertheless, as he points out here, the national debt clock keeps humming away near Times Square for anyone who wants to see it. And the debt for an individual taxpayer now $170,000, and the total debt per family of $800,000. Well, we're going to have to someday, and we've actually, I think, passed the point of no return, but someday we're going to have to do something to address this, because eventually the national debt will just overtake all of the federal spending. Just the interest on the debt alone will be eventually the largest element in the federal budget. We can't continue down that road. And certainly there is the possibility to grow our way out of the debt. There is certainly the possibility to try to once again balance the budget. The closest we ever came to balancing the budget was under President Bill Clinton and under Speaker of the House Newt Gingrich. Even then it wasn't quite balanced because they were still taking from the Social Security Trust Fund. But it's just a reminder from Robert Knight why the government must be tamed. We eventually simply cannot head down this road without very dire consequences. So one more reminder. Thank you, Robert Knight, for reminding us, and we'll get to that probably later in the week as well. Just before we go, let me mention again, if you're interested in how to lead when you are not in charge, that book is on the website. If you'd like to know a little bit more about this Great Advocate series, which is available for young people to really train them in worldview and apologetics, all those resources are available at our website, pointofview.net. If you appreciate some of the conversation we've had on all sorts of different issues, hope you'll click on that button that says donate and help us out. Even a one-time gift would be greatly appreciated. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Tomorrow we're going to get into apologetics. How can we defend the Christian faith, and how can we be more effective as Christians in a secular culture? So we'll see you back there tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs